At Christmas dinner, they laughed when I said I was still writing. One of them even offered to help me find a real job. But when my agent called, on speaker, to confirm my $22 million deal with HBO, no one laughed again. This isn't just about money. It's about what happens when you stop proving yourself to people who never truly saw you and start living like you already matter. My name is Elena Moore. I'm 36 years old and I live alone in a modest apartment just outside Portland, Oregon. There's nothing remarkable about the building. Beige siding, slightly uneven steps, a humming refrigerator that never quite quiets. But I like it here. It's quiet. It's mine. I don't own a luxury car. I still drive the same Honda I bought 12 years ago after college with its coffee-stained upholstery and a radio that only plays 2 stations. My clothes are plain. Soft sweaters, worn jeans, boots that were made to last. There's no sparkle in my wardrobe, no brand logos. And honestly, I've never felt more comfortable in my own skin. You wouldn't know it to look at me, but I write stories read by millions. Under a pen name, I'm the author of the Hollow Year series. Books that became something bigger than I ever imagined. They started as quiet fiction written during long nights with cheap tea and a desk lamp that flickered if you looked at it wrong. Now those stories are a hit streaming series watched around the world. Red carpets, contract negotiations, New York Times reviews. They've all happened, just not with my face on them. I've never told my family, not because I'm hiding something, not because I'm ashamed, but because peace matters more than applause. Because sometimes the people who raised you are the least willing to believe in what you've become. Unless it comes wrapped in the language they value, wealth, prestige, public praise. Growing up, I was the quiet one. The girl who stayed in her room with a notebook while the rest of the family crowded around the TV cheering for Evan's soccer games or Dad's weekend barbecue specials. My brother was charming, talkative, golden-haired, and destined, as my mother always said, for something great. And me, I was sweet, bookish, a little spacey. It's strange the way a family can write your character for you long before you understand how to hold a pen. Evan was 2 years younger, but you'd never know it by the way everyone deferred to him. If he forgot his science project, it was he's creative, he'll improvise. If I forgot mine, it was Elena, you need to be more responsible. At 13, he was praised for making jokes during dinner. At 16, I was scolded for correcting his grammar. He failed upward. I stayed quiet. Even now, our parents treat him like the family's pride. He's between ventures, which is a kind way of saying he's gone through 3 failed startups in 5 years and still thinks networking means having brunch with people who pretend to like him. But they still dote on him, still believe in his potential. Meanwhile, I've become someone they barely notice. Not that they ever truly did. It's December 23rd, and I'm folding a soft navy sweater into my overnight bag. I haven't been back to the family house in nearly a year, though I've sent the usual birthday cards and holiday gifts. The invitation came via group text, my mother's way of maintaining the illusion of closeness without ever asking how I am. Christmas dinner at 6. Bring dessert if you want. Evan's girlfriend is vegan. That was it. No, how are you? No, we'd love to see you. Just a time of command and a subtle reminder that Evan is always the main character. I debated not going. Every year I tell myself I won't. Every year I pack the same bag, buy the same cookies from the same bakery downtown, and drive 90 minutes to sit in the same room where I've been overlooked since childhood. It's not that they're cruel. Not exactly. It's more like I've become a placeholder in their lives, someone who fills space without taking any. I could write a best-selling novel about a woman just like me, and they'd skim the blurb, ask if I've considered applying for a real job, and tell me I look tired. But still, I go. There's a part of me stubborn and stupid and deeply human that hopes that this year they'll see me, not as Evan's older sister, not as the quiet one, but as a person, as their daughter. I zip the bag shut, take one last look around the apartment. The bookshelf is full, not just with classics, but with copies of my own novels carefully tucked spine out, signed under my pen name, the kind of success no one in my family would recognize if it were sitting in front of them. Maybe that's why I never told them. Because I wanted to be known without explanation. Because I needed someone, anyone, to see me without needing a resume attached. I lock the door behind me and head down to the car. The air is crisp. The sky is turning lavender. I breathe it in like armor. Tomorrow night I'll sit at a table surrounded by people who think I've failed. They'll talk over me, around me, and through me, but they won't break me, because I've built a life far beyond their field of vision. And soon, without me even trying, they'll finally see it. The Moore house always felt like a showroom, a place staged to impress, not to live in. When I pulled into the long circular driveway lined with dormant hydrangeas and fairy lights woven into the hedges, I had to remind myself this was once my home. The front door was already open. Through it, I could hear laughter that didn't include me. "Look who finally made it," my mother said the moment I stepped inside, kissing the air near my cheek before turning away mid-sentence to greet someone more important. She didn't ask how I was or how the drive went. She rarely did. The house smelled of rosemary wood polish and something faintly artificial, like seasonal candles that hadn't been burned long enough to lose their factory scent. I followed the noise into the great room. Marble floors, white leather furniture no one sat on, framed photos of Evan in every stage of glory, Little League champion college graduate startup founder, posing with other men in slim suits and rented smiles. "Isn't this place something?" a man I didn't recognize said to his partner as they sipped cocktails under the chandelier. "Feels like a magazine." It did. A cold one. Dinner was being plated in the dining room by uniformed staff. Not caterers who blended into the background, but servers trained to perform. Silver domes over every dishcloth, napkins folded like swans. And not a single person seemed to find it odd that Christmas dinner had a waitstaff. Evan just got back from Aspen. My mother was telling a group of neighbors. He's been networking with some venture capital folks there. Very promising connections. Evan, standing beside her with his champagne flute, smiled like someone used to being on stage. Still early, but yeah. Some serious interest. Might be partnering on a fintech platform next quarter. I almost laughed. Next quarter was how Evan referred to the future when he had no concrete plan. The last time he used it, he was pitching a food delivery startup that never left beta. Before that, it was an eco-friendly luggage brand that burned through its seed money in 6 months. And yet, here he was again, admired for his ambition, his confidence, his recycled optimism. "Of course," my mother added with a chuckle, "he's always been the visionary of the family." Elena's more grounded. Grounded. I let the word settle like a pebble in my chest. She said it like a compliment, but it wasn't. It was code, for plain, for boring, for the one who wouldn't embarrass them, but also wouldn't make them proud. "Elena." "There you are," came Aunt Connie's voice from behind me. She always sounded like she'd just walked into a stage light. "I was just telling Bella about you." I turned to see my 16-year-old cousin standing next to her, nervously adjusting her glasses. "Bella's a big reader," Connie continued. "Loves creative writing. Isn't that sweet?" I smiled at Bella. "That's wonderful. What kind of things do you like to write?" "Mostly short stories," she said shyly. "I've been working on a little sci-fi piece for school." "Ah," Connie interrupted, patting her arm like she was comforting a child. "Just as long as it stays a hobby, right? We don't want another starving artist in the family." "Lord knows your cousin's made a name for herself. Just not one anyone's heard of." My smile didn't break, but something inside me did. "Besides," she added with a knowing glance, "writing doesn't exactly pay the bills, does it, Elena?" I said nothing. Because anything I said would have sounded defensive. Because no one in this room was listening anyway. And because I knew Bella was watching. And what she saw mattered more than what I said. When we were called to dinner, place cards marked every seat. It was a long, glistening table dressed in gold and white with a centerpiece that stretched the full length like a floral river. At the far end, I found my name. Next to the kitchen door. I took my seat quietly, the same way I always had. On the fringe, close enough to see everyone, far enough to be forgotten. On my left was a couple from my father's golf club, both too busy recounting their trip to Milan to notice me. On my right was the dessert cart, which would block my view the moment it was wheeled into position. I folded my napkin into my lap and glanced down the table at Evan, who was seated just left of center directly under the chandelier. His date, someone new, probably temporary, was already snapping pictures of the meal for her Instagram story. My mother beamed at them like a proud campaign manager. My father lifted his glass and said, "To Evan, and to big things ahead." No one toasted me. No one asked what I was working on. No one remembered that in the last 3 months alone, I'd signed 2 international rights deals, consulted on a series finale rewrite, and had my manuscript translated into 5 languages. And that was okay. Because I wasn't here for applause. I was here for something I hadn't fully named. Not hope exactly, but maybe closure. A last look at the version of myself they insisted on seeing. A seat at the table not to be seen but to see. Clearly. As the first course was served and conversation swelled, I reached for my water, took a slow sip, and exhaled. I was exactly where they put me, but I didn't belong here anymore. Dinner had officially begun. The clinking of crystal, the low hum of forced laughter, and the smell of roasted duck mingled with white truffle and saffron risotto. I sat straight in my chair, folding and refolding my napkin in my lap, as the first course disappeared from the plates of people too busy talking to taste what they were eating. The conversation moved from vacation homes to political rants to a long and tedious story about a neighbor's facelift. I stayed silent. Not out of shyness, but because silence is easier than answering questions no one really wants answered. And then, as always, came the inevitable turn. "So," said my father, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a monogrammed napkin, "what's everyone been up to this year?" The question was general, but I knew what was coming. Uncle Grant launched into a story about renovating their lake house. My cousin Melissa casually mentioned starting her 3rd podcast. Evan, never one to miss an opportunity, recounted his latest business pitch to an investor in Santa Monica. A golf buddy, of course. And then it was my turn. All heads turned toward me with varying levels of polite interest, like spectators watching a movie they'd already decided was going to be boring. "I've just been writing," I said, simply setting my fork down. "Same as always." A moment passed, and then my father chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "At your age," he said, as if it were a joke I'd failed to deliver properly. "Still writing stories? Elena, come on. Be realistic." The comment stung, but it wasn't new. It was a line I'd heard before in different words in different rooms, wearing different clothes. Before I could respond, my mother jumped in, her voice light, almost cheerful. "You know, I could ask around at the Herald. They're always looking for column editors. Something steady, reliable. It's local and you'd get benefits. Just until you find your footing. Find my footing." It was such a strange phrase, as if I'd been limping through life. As if writing wasn't real unless someone she knew could read it in their Sunday paper. I smiled. That small, practiced smile that women perfect when we've been insulted in public but can't afford to cause a scene. No one asked what I was writing. Not what the book was about or how it was going. Not whether I was happy doing it. And certainly not whether I was successful. Because in their eyes I couldn't be. Not if they didn't understand it. Not if I didn't show it with a business card or a corner office or a real job title they could brag about at Bridge Club. "It's okay, Mom," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've got a lot of projects going. Things are going well." "Well, that's good," she replied in the same tone one uses when a neighbor's child finally gets a part-time job. "You've always been creative." Creative. Another coded word, another tiny dagger wrapped in a compliment. The conversation moved on without me. I faded into the white noise of cutlery and banter. Under the table, my fingers curled into my palm. Not in anger. Not exactly. It wasn't rage I felt. It was the slow, familiar tightening of every muscle you clench when you realize again that you will never be enough for the people who raised you. That you could scale Everest, write the next Jane Eyre, win a Pulitzer, and they'd still wonder why you didn't become a teacher or a lawyer. That they'll always see the version of you they decided was real before you were old enough to say otherwise. I looked across the table at Evan, who was swirling his wine like a connoisseur. He hadn't said a word to me since I arrived. Didn't ask about my life, my year, or even if I still lived in Portland. But he had asked Melissa for the contact info of the guy who installed her new sound system. I turned back to my plate, poking at the risotto. It was perfect, of course. Everything here always looked perfect. But I couldn't taste a thing. I wondered what they'd do if I stood up and told the truth. If I said I'm the author of The Hollow Year, the series your friends are watching on HBO right now, If I said I just signed a multi-million-dollar contract for the next adaptation, if I said I could buy this house in cash and tear it down if I wanted to, but I'd never waste money on something so hollow, but I didn't, because they wouldn't believe me, because they'd think I was exaggerating or making it up, because their understanding of me had hardened into something that facts couldn't soften, and because I didn't want to win them over anymore. I just wanted to get through the meal with my dignity intact. So I nodded when they offered more wine. I said how lovely when Melissa shared her engagement story. I even laughed at Evan's recycled startup pitch. And all the while, I kept my hand clenched under the table. It wasn't until dessert was announced, and the clinking started again, that I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Not because the moment had passed, but because I had. The hum of conversation in the dining room was as polished and orchestrated as the place settings. Silver forks glinted under the glow of the chandelier, wine flowed like punctuation, and the low laughter of self-assured people filled the corners of the room like background music no one truly listened to. I sat quietly tracing the rim of my water glass with my index finger, letting the familiar invisibility settle over me like a shawl. I had nearly finished my dessert, a carefully torched crème brûlée with a sugar crust so delicate I was afraid to break it too fast. I always ate slowly at these dinners. It gave me something to do with my hands, something that made me look occupied, engaged, present if not included. And then my phone buzzed on the table beside my plate. Once, then again, Jennifer. My agent rarely called during dinner hours. She respected boundaries, a line we'd drawn clearly over the years. So if she was calling now, something must have shifted. I picked it up with a touch of hesitation. I could feel the subtle ripple of attention from a few people around me. Phones weren't entirely banned at the table, but they were discouraged. Too modern, too impolite. Too real for a family built on curated performance. I cleared my throat softly, cutting through the ambient murmur. Apologies. I said, my voice steady but quiet. This might be important. I'll put it on speaker just in case. I caught a brief glance from my father, brows lifted as if I'd said I was about to juggle flaming torches. My mother's eyes flicked up from her wine glass with mild curiosity, though her smile didn't waver. I pressed the green button and set the phone down gently between the bread plate and the centerpiece. "Hi, Jennifer," I said. Her voice came through the speaker clear and measured, the kind of cadence that made conference rooms go quiet and boardrooms lean in. "Elena, hi. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." A beat of silence stretched in the room like air being held. I just wanted to confirm a few last-minute details for tomorrow before the team heads to London. London. That one word alone caused a shift. The air grew heavier, denser, as if the table itself had suddenly become more aware of its own weight. Jennifer continued, effortlessly composed. "The red carpet for the Hollow Year Season 3 is scheduled to begin at 700 p.m. sharp. Dior has confirmed final delivery of your dress, the navy silk one you liked from the couture fitting. Your car will pick you up from the Savoy at 5:45. The sound of a utensil hitting a plate broke the quiet. Melissa. Her spoon had fallen from her hand and rolled to the side with an awkward clatter. Jennifer didn't pause. Also, Warner Brothers officially approved the $22 million extension for seasons 3 and 4. Your portion will be distributed over 5 years as negotiated. My mother's posture changed instantly. A barely perceptible tightening of the shoulders, the kind that came not from tension, but calculation. My father set down his glass with a soft clink, and I saw his jaw tick. Jennifer's voice remained steady, almost cheerful. This contract also now holds the distinction of being the highest-paid screenwriting deal for a female author in the past decade. I glanced around the table. No one spoke. The air had gone still. Not from reverence, but disbelief. "And one last thing," she added. "The Hollow Year just returned to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list this morning. 18th week total." It was like dropping a stone into glass. The silence shattered something intangible in the room. Not the table settings, not the flowers, not even the veneer of politeness, but the unspoken hierarchy that had long dictated my place in this family. "Would you like me to confirm your notes meeting with Spielberg's team next week?" Jennifer asked. I felt a pulse at my throat, but kept my expression neutral. My voice was calm when I answered. Let's do that. And tell them I'll send script notes after the London event. Perfect, she said. That's all for now. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. Congratulations again, Elena. Big day. Thanks, Jennifer, I said, my voice quieter now. Talk tomorrow. I ended the call. The silence afterward was almost reverent, sacred in its shock. I placed my phone back down on the table like a delicate object, or a detonated device. The chandelier above flickered ever so slightly, as if it too was unsure what had just happened. Melissa was staring at me, blinking like her eyes had stopped working. My mother's lips were parted, but no sound emerged. Aunt Connie had stopped mid-sip, her glass still raised. Evan looked stunned. Not angry, not jealous, just uncomprehending. I let the quiet stretch. It was the first time in years they'd really looked at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. And I didn't flinch. After a long, heavy pause, I spoke. Voice low but certain. I suppose I said, folding my napkin beside my plate, I should clarify a few things. The silence after the call lingered like smoke after a spark. Not loud but heavy. Every breath, every glance seemed louder in its absence. Then, just before the moment could fully collapse into something irretrievable, Jennifer's voice returned calm and measured. One more thing. Spielberg's team reached out again to finalize the lunch meeting next week. Shall I confirm? I didn't blink. My voice stayed as even as if she were asking about groceries. Yes. Tell them I'll send my script notes tonight. And thank you, Jen. Always a pleasure, she said. Talk soon. The line clicked off. And just like that, the divide between who they thought I was and who I'd become cracked wide open. For a few seconds, no one moved. I could hear the faint chime of the grandfather clock in the next room, as if time itself was pausing to eavesdrop. My mother was the first to speak, and her voice cracked like the edge of a glass being tapped too hard. Wait, she said slowly, setting her wineglass down with careful precision. Did she say the hollow year? I nodded, turning gently toward her. Yes. She blinked rapidly, her expression cycling between disbelief and dawning realization. That's the show Bella binge-watched all summer. She wouldn't stop talking about it. I had no idea you were involved in that. I wrote it, I said plainly. The books and the series. Under a pen name. Across the table, Bella's eyes widened in awe. She looked at me like I'd just grown wings. Evan, seated at the heart of the table, and for once no longer the center of attention, stared into his drink. His posture had folded inward, the sharp edges of his confidence now dulled by something quieter. He wasn't angry, just unsure, like he didn't know the rules of this game anymore, because the person he thought he knew wasn't playing it. Aunt Connie made a small strangled sound that might have been a laugh. Well, she said, adjusting the collar of her blouse, I always knew you had potential. It was the kind of thing people say when they're trying to rewire history in real time. Melissa still hadn't picked up her spoon. Her face was frozen in that open-mouthed half-smile that people wear when they're pretending not to be stunned. My father cleared his throat, a sound I'd heard many times before, usually just before he delivered unsolicited advice or dismissed someone's opinion. But now it was all he had. A noise, not a statement. I looked down the length of the table, past the flickering candlelight and untouched desserts, past the glasses and plates and folded napkins. And I saw them all. Not as enemies, not even as family, but as people who had spent years looking through me, only now realizing I had a voice worth hearing. I didn't mean to surprise anyone, I said softly, my voice steady. I just never felt the need to announce it. But why wouldn't you tell us? My mother asked. Her tone was less accusatory than confused. Why keep something like that from your own family? I gave her a small, tired smile. Because I did tell you. Over and over. I said I was writing. I said I was working on projects. But no one ever asked what kind, or seemed to want to know. My father's jaw clenched. You never explained it was that. I did, I said gently. You just didn't hear it. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply true. I had offered the truth in pieces for years. Small invitations to be seen. but they were too busy fitting me into the box they'd labeled dreamy, artsy, impractical to notice when I outgrew it. Margaret reached for her necklace, fiddling with the clasp. "Well," she murmured, "we always knew you were creative." There it was again. That word. Creative. Still a cage even now. Elena the creative one. Evan the successful one. Only now the labels no longer fit, and the room was struggling to find new ones quickly enough. "I never kept this from you. Out of spite, I added more for myself than for them. I just stopped trying to explain something you'd already decided wasn't worth understanding." Bella leaned forward, eyes bright. "Wait, so the character of Marin, the one who walks away from her whole life to become a writer in the woods, that was you?" I smiled, this time with warmth. Parts of her, yes. "That's so cool," she whispered. Connie patted Bella's arm. "Sweetheart, maybe now's not the time for questions." "No," I said, still looking at Bella. "It's okay. She's the only one at this table who's asking because she's genuinely curious. Not because she suddenly thinks I'm useful." That hung in the air. No one challenged it. Because they couldn't. Because they knew it was true. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I wasn't here for revenge or applause. I was here to speak plainly, to let the truth exist in the room like it always should have. For once I didn't feel small in this house. I felt seen, not for the daughter they imagined, but for the woman I had quietly become. It didn't take long. The silence that followed my reveal had barely begun to cool before the recalibrations started. I could see it in the subtle shifts, the softened expressions, the curious tilts of heads, the forced warmth now rising in their voices like a sudden spring thaw after years of winter. My father cleared his throat again, this time with purpose. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table in a way that suggested strategy more than sincerity. "Well," he began, voice lighter now, "if you ever think about expanding the series again, a sequel, or maybe a spin-off. I know someone at Amazon Studios. Good people. We golf together." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed the moment to land. I watched him struggle to act as though this was a natural extension of our relationship, as if he'd always been involved in my creative world, not someone who had once called my writing a phase. "That's good to know," I said with a polite nod, as if he were a distant acquaintance offering vague advice, not the man who raised me. Across the table, my mother suddenly came alive. Her voice brightened. Her posture straightened. She reached out as if to take my hand, but stopped short when I didn't meet her halfway. "Darling," she said, beaming like a pageant queen, "we've always been proud of you. Truly. We just didn't know all the specifics." Specifics, as if it was a matter of missed detail, not years of disinterest, as if the absence of questions of encouragement of basic curiosity could be chalked up to a communication error. Still, I smiled, because now they were trying, or at least pretending to. Aunt Connie, never one to stay quiet for long, chimed in next. "You know what you should do," she said, her voice syrupy with enthusiasm. "You should write a book about the family. The Moores are quite the characters. I mean, just think of the stories. It'd sell like hotcakes." She laughed at her own suggestion, already picturing herself in print. My smile didn't falter, not even slightly. "That's an idea," I said, calmly picking up my water glass. "If I ever did, I'd make sure to change every name and every identifying detail." I set the glass back down and looked her directly in the eye, just enough to make sure no one recognized themselves. The room shifted again, not with outrage, not with anger, with unease, real unease. For the first time that evening, I saw it, the flicker of self-awareness in their eyes, the realization that maybe their behavior, their words, their years of casual dismissal weren't harmless, that maybe they had become characters, and maybe they wouldn't like how they'd be written. Aunt Connie laughed, but it came out tight. "Oh, of course," she said. "Just a fun idea. No pressure." My mother busied herself with adjusting the placement of a napkin that was already perfectly square. My father took a sip of wine and avoided my gaze. Evan, still quiet, tapped his fork against the rim of his glass in slow, rhythmic clinks, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since we were kids. I could feel the discomfort ripple across the table like a breeze brushing against taut fabric. They weren't angry with me. Not really. They were unsettled by the idea that the narrative had shifted, and they were no longer in control of how the story would be told. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was choosing who got to matter in the telling. Melissa, recovering her composure, piped up with forced cheer. So, when's the next season coming out? I mean, now that we know you're behind it, we'll have to watch more closely. I gave her a small, closed-mouth smile. Shooting begins in January, but there's plenty to catch up on in the meantime. She laughed too loud, then reached for her phone, likely to scroll IMDb for my pseudonym. As if finding my name somewhere would validate what she'd just heard. As if she couldn't quite believe I was real until the internet confirmed it. Bella was still beaming beside Aunt Connie, clearly unaffected by the performance of damage control. She was the only one not trying to reposition herself in my life. Just genuinely delighted to know someone who had built a world with words. Her innocence felt like oxygen. I started writing again last week, she said quietly. A fantasy thing. I'd love to show you sometime. I nodded this time, letting my smile grow. I'd love that. In the corner of my eye, I caught my mother watching the exchange. Not with pride. Not yet. But with something closer to unfamiliarity. She was looking at me as if for the first time realizing she hadn't the faintest idea who I'd become. I didn't blame her. Not anymore. But I wasn't going to save her from that discomfort either. Let her sit in it. Let them all sit in it. It wasn't vengeance. It was balance. For years I had sat at this table shrinking, folding into the smallest version of myself so they wouldn't choke on the edges. Now I took up space. And I didn't apologize for it. The cheesecake arrived with a flourish. Small white plates gliding across the table like swans, each carrying a perfect slice, topped with sugared berries and curls of dark chocolate. The staff trained to disappear did just that, vanishing as quickly as they'd come, leaving behind only silence and sugar. I watched a server place a plate in front of me. The fork rested beside it, polished to a mirror finish. I stared at the dessert for a moment, not because I wanted it, but because it was something to look at. Something that wasn't their faces. Their faces now were performing a different kind of theater, smiles too wide, nods too frequent. Every look came with a delay, like they were waiting to see how I would interpret it before deciding whether to lean in or retreat. It was exhausting. There was a moment, always is, after revelation and before recalibration, where people scramble to rewrite the narrative without acknowledging the original draft. That's where we were now. A room full of people pretending they had always seen me clearly, and I was tired of pretending back. I set down my fork untouched. Then I stood up. The motion was small, but in a room like that, where stillness was a kind of currency, it drew every eye. I think I'm going to head out, I said, tucking my napkin beside my plate. My voice was soft but firm, not seeking permission, just stating a fact. Across the table, my mother's head snapped up. So soon, she said, the corners of her mouth stretching into a too eager smile. Stay a little longer, darling. We're serving cheesecake. She gestured lightly toward the dessert like it might anchor me, like a plate of dairy and sugar could smooth over a decade of dismissal. The room waited. Everyone did, out of habit, out of confusion, maybe out of hope that I'd slip back into the version of myself they were more comfortable with. But I didn't. Instead, I turned to face her fully. My hands were relaxed at my sides. My shoulders square, not rigid. My voice quiet, but this time, it carried weight. If I've always been welcome, I said, looking her straight in the eyes. Why have I spent the last 15 years sitting next to the kitchen door? The room stilled. No one moved. My mother's expression faltered, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something real underneath. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers fidgeted with the stem of her wineglass, twisting it gently, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound hollow. She found nothing. I let the silence hang, not to punish but to allow the truth to breathe. There was no accusation in my tone, no rage in my posture, just honesty, the kind that's been buried too long and finally makes its way to the surface without asking for approval. Behind her, Aunt Connie looked down at her hands. Evan stared into the remainder of his drink. Melissa blinked too slowly, clearly still processing the last hour like it had been a foreign film without subtitles. I reached for my coat on the back of my chair. Thank you for dinner, I said to no one in particular. I'll let myself out. Let me walk you to the door, my mother offered almost on instinct, but I shook my head gently. It's okay. I know the way. I walked past the crystal glasses and the centerpiece and the people who had spent years seeing me as a shadow. I passed the empty hallway where family photos lined the walls, all birthdays, weddings, and graduations where I'd been present but peripheral. In the front hall, the scent of pine still lingered from the wreath on the door. My coat slid on easily. The scarf I'd brought was still looped neatly where I'd left it undisturbed, like no one expected it would be needed, like no one imagined I'd leave early. But I was leaving, not in protest, not in fury, just finally. As I wrapped the scarf around my neck, I glanced back down the hallway. The dining room was still visible, the warm glow of candles, the polished silver catching the light, my empty chair tucked neatly beneath the table like I'd never been there at all. And yet the difference now was that they all knew I had been. They knew I'd spoken, that I'd stepped out of the quiet corner they'd put me in and taken up space, unapologetically. I opened the front door. A rush of cold air greeted me, sharp and bracing. It smelled like winter. Real winter. Not cinnamon candles or faux pine, but the kind of air that reminds you you're alive. I walked down the front steps slowly, deliberately. My boots crunched softly on the frost-covered stone. The driveway shimmered beneath the porch light, scattered with fallen pine needles. When I slid into the driver's seat of my old Honda, I let the engine purr to life and sat there for a long moment. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry about. I didn't rage. There was no one left to argue with. I just exhaled. Deeply. Fully. The kind of breath that only comes when something long held inside is finally released. For the first time, I wasn't leaving that house feeling smaller. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't folding myself down to fit into the role they wrote for me when I was still too young to pick up the pen. I was simply leaving, and for once, it was on my terms. I backed out of the long circular driveway without hesitation, without second-guessing, without looking in the rear-view mirror. I didn't need to see them wave. I didn't need them to follow. I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking toward myself. When I got home, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The front door clicked shut behind me, and I stood still for a moment in the dark, letting the silence settle around my shoulders like a well-worn sweater. No footsteps. No forced conversation. Just the hum of the heater kicking on, and the soft creak of the floor beneath my feet. My apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The scent of my life, honest and unadorned. I slipped off my boots, hung up my coat, and made my way into the kitchen. The lights were soft here, low and amber-toned. Safe. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then leaned against the counter as it began to hum. There was no rush now, no performance waiting to resume. I had already said everything I needed to say, and more importantly, chosen everything I needed to choose. When the kettle whistled, I poured the water into my favorite mug, a chipped navy one with a cracked handle I'd glued back together twice. It had no design, no quote, just warmth. Like me, it was unremarkable to anyone else but perfectly suited for what it held. I carried it over to the couch and sat with both hands wrapped around the mug, letting the steam rise slowly into my face. My body still carried the weight of the night. The posture of restraint, the effort of silence, the discipline it takes to speak carefully when you could easily let bitterness do the talking. But underneath it all, I felt light. Lighter than I had in years. I opened my laptop. The soft blue glow illuminated the room, casting long shadows against the bookshelf and the blanket-draped chair in the corner. The one where I used to sit writing late into the night long before anyone knew my name. A new email blinked into my inbox. The subject line was simple. Thank you. I clicked. Inside was a message from a teenage reader. No punctuation at the beginning, just raw words poured onto the screen. Hi. I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I needed to say something. I started reading The Hollow Year last year when I was going through depression. I was in a really dark place and didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. But Marin, The way she thinks, how quiet she is, how people overlook her. I saw myself in her. You wrote someone like me, and for the first time I didn't feel invisible. Thank you for writing her. Thank you for writing me. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I smiled. Not the polished kind, not the practiced kind, but the kind that came from deep in my chest. The kind that unfolded slowly, the way a flower might open in the dark when no one's watching. That's the compliment I needed, I whispered, letting the words float into the stillness of the room. Not applause from a table, not forced praise from people who miss the whole journey. This was what mattered. This was why I wrote. Not to be seen by everyone, but to be felt by someone. I thought back to the early days, to the cramped desk in my college dorm, the rejected manuscripts, the nights spent staring at blinking cursors and wondering if I was wasting my life. I remembered the feeling of telling people I was a writer, only to watch their smiles tighten and eyes glaze over. And yet I had kept going. Not because I believed I would be celebrated, but because I believed the story mattered even if I wasn't invited to the table where success was defined. And now here I was, no longer waiting to be allowed in, no longer whispering. I closed the email gently as if sealing a letter I would carry forever. Then I opened my messages and typed a quick note to Jennifer. Let's schedule the pitch with HBO next week. I'm ready for the next story. A pause. Then I hit send. Not because I was chasing the next milestone, but because I was ready to keep building, to keep giving voice to the ones no one notices, to keep showing up on the page even if I'm left out of the room. I placed my empty mug in the sink and turned off the lights. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, I was wide awake, and finally, unmistakably, whole. Have you ever felt invisible in the very place that was supposed to see you first? Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace? Until you realized the silence was costing you your sense of self. Elena's story isn't just hers. It belongs to anyone who's ever outgrown the version of themselves their family couldn't let go of. To anyone who's ever built something incredible in the shadows, not for applause, but because the world needed it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What moment made you stop waiting for validation? Or maybe, what story are you still waiting to tell? If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. We share real, raw, and powerful stories because your voice matters, just like Elena's did, just like yours still does.